Welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm Michelle Meow, and I'm your moderator tonight. I'm also a member of the Board of Governors for the Commonwealth Club World Affairs, and also host and producer of the Michelle Meow Show, which is your A through Z covering the LGBT, LMNOP, and everyone in between. Tonight's program is focused on the AANHPI vote. And for those who are joining us online and here in person in the building, AANHPI stands for Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. And I'm so excited for this conversation. I think mainly because I've been trying to talk to anyone and everyone about politics and no one has entertained me. And so I thought, okay, fine. I'll put a panel together, and we're going to do a program here at the iconic Commonwealth Club World Affairs. We'll stream live and also record this for KPIX. How about that? So then everybody will just listen to us. Let me go ahead and get started and introduce to you to our esteemed panel. We have the Honorable Mayor of Daly City, Jessalyn Manalo. We also have, feel free to clap. Karthik Ramakrishnan, who is with AAPI Data, and also Michelle Zhang, who is the founder and director of the Society of Heart's Delight, and last but not least, Nancy Tung, who is president of the San Francisco Democratic Party. Let's give a huge round of applause for our panel. Well, I was going to get started with a data and then get started with Karthik here, but I think, it's an intimate crowd and let's get to know each other. I would like to know, what have you been up to in the last 24 hours as we're pushing in less than 2 weeks towards an election, this thing called an election? We'll start with Mayor Jessalyn. So where have you been? What have you been doing 24 hours ago?
Thank you so much. Well, I actually got off a flight early this morning and I came from the White House. We were celebrating Filipino American History Month, and the White House had invited Filipino American leaders from across the country, really to celebrate. And it was historic because there was a lot of different leaders from different sectors of the community, and it was really beautiful to see. And there were moments, I would say, where I felt really proud because, we were showing a film called Nurses Unseen, and it's an independent film, and maybe in the future y'all can catch it. But it was just talking about the plight about nurses in the United States, specifically Filipinos. And they had, migrated over here because of what they called was the brain drain. There was a need for nurses in the United States. And when they showed the film, it kind of depicted, what Filipinos were seeing back then. And there was a lot of, cartoons that were really harsh. And to be in the Indian Treaty Room at that time and seeing that film being played, we've come to a place as Filipino Americans to be able to have that type of empowerment, celebrating our culture, but also signaling, well, what has the history been throughout the United States among immigration, among really what had happened and how we came here as a community. And I know that probably intersects with a lot of our AAPI, NHPI brothers and sisters as well, right? But it was really amazing to be in community and to be there at the White House and getting that recognition that's long overdue. Yeah.
Happy Filipino Heritage Month. Let's go. Yeah.
Filipino American History Month.
Oh, and Filipino American History Month. Yeah.
And I'll share with you and for those watching, it was actually on October 1587 when Filipinos first landed in Morro Bay. And so we celebrate, Filipino American History Month in October. So thank you.
Woo. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Karthik, you rolled up here with a packed suitcase. But anyway, 24 hours ago, what were you doing?
24 hours ago, so I was in Berkeley. So in addition to being the founder and executive director of API Data, just recently I moved to Berkeley and I'm a researcher there. and API data has moved to Berkeley as well. Prior to that, I was a professor for 19 years at University of California, Riverside, and I started API data about a decade ago. But that's not what you asked me. You asked me what I've been doing for the last 24 hours. I get to do for a living with what a lot of people do maybe as a hobby, which is to track various surveys, pay attention to news dynamics. In addition to a survey researcher, I'm also a political scientist by training. So I try to, have a bit of distance and to try to analyze things without, my rooting interest for any particular issue or candidate. So I've been nerding out. Maybe a little, sometimes it's good to take a break, but it's hard to resist, as I think for most people now, political scientists or otherwise.
Thank you, Karthik. Hold your questions, by the way. We will be circulating a mic later. We want you engaged in this conversation. And we hope that you do ask Karthik about, the 8-ball answer, or you know what I'm talking about. What's your guess? What's going to happen in 2 weeks? Michelle, what have you been up to?
Hi. Last 24 hours, we're busy with planning 2 events this weekend. One is our civic engagement events with a special speaker from Texas, Assembly Member Jeannie Wu. Another one is our Society of Hearts Lights is working with City of Sunnyvale to put up our pet parade show. So we are, and for this year's pet parade, we are going to organize a group of LGBTQ pets, working down the street. So, and also, it's so close to the election. So when you do community building, lots of people come to you so many things. I was like, hey, everything has to be passed till the election night. So sometimes I just tell people, the election night, you can come to me and I can take you to election, all these parties, to watch parties. Yeah, this is what I'm busy for the last 24 hours.
And again, last but not least, Nancy. Ooh, lots happening.
Yeah, so I'm glad I'm answering this question last because I kind of have forgotten what time is, and so every day is work, and every hour is work. But 24 hours ago, I was giving an interview to a Swiss journalist that had come to San Francisco asking about Kamala Harris, about our campaign headquarters, what we were doing there, and how it might affect the election. It's not the first international paper that I've given an interview to this election season, and I do think that part of it is because the world is watching. They're watching to see what Americans do, and the fact that that we have such an outsized role in global political safety, I think, is on everybody's minds. So the direction of our presidency is something that people are very closely watching. But I will say that 48 hours ago, I was on a bus back from Reno. We led 3 buses of volunteers from San Francisco to Reno and Carson City to go knock doors and canvass for Harris Walz. And I will say that in looking at the data, I don't have to tell you what the data looks like. The election is very, very close. It's very close nationally, but in Nevada particularly, Biden won Nevada by 1.7%. It was heavily based on the turnout in 2 counties, in Clark County, where is Las Vegas, and then in Reno, which is Washoe County. So very blue counties. The rest of the state is very red. The voter registration there is almost equal thirds Democrats, Republicans, and independents. But the reason Nevada is blue is because the independents split almost evenly between Republicans and Democrats. But what that means is that there are fewer resources on the ground for Democrats who are trying to persuade those independents. And I think the polling there in the average polling in Nevada right now is basically a tie. So we are moving people into Nevada and Arizona from California as quickly as we can to do as much work as we can.
What a great segue for our first official question. And headline after headline that I've actually been researching has been saying that the AANHPI vote is a critical vote and a very important voting block. But as you know, right, in our community, we are not a monolith and we don't always vote the same. However, there is some data. So we're going to open up the first question to Karthik, and I'm going to read this just so that I don't screw up the data. But according to a recent survey conducted by AAPI Data and APIA Vote, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders saw a major jump in voter interest in their September survey when compared to their survey in April and May of this year. So prior analysis by AAPI Data also showed record high turnout among AA and HPIs in the 2020 election. So let's elaborate on this and why you think there is a major increase this election. So Karthik, we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Traditionally, when you look at Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders who are eligible to vote, so these are adult U.S. citizens, their turnout has not been that high. And there are a host of reasons, including, say, with the Asian American population. Most Asian Americans who are eligible to vote are foreign-born, they're naturalized citizens. And even if they have a college degree, which, political science models would say means high turnout, most Asian Americans who have college degrees got their college degrees in Asia and not in the US. So they didn't have the same kind of political socialization experience the way that native-born folks do. On top of that, research by my colleague Jenna Wong, myself, and many others have shown that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have been less likely to be reached out to by the political parties. So that was the situation, I would say, through the 2012 election. And then you started seeing a shift. Part of it was when Mitt Romney lost, the Republican National Committee did this, what they called an autopsy, right? And how can we change? And part of what they said is we need to start competing in communities of color. We need to start recruiting candidates to run under the Republican banner. We need to start showing up and start competing. And they started doing that, and they chose Southern California, Nevada, New Jersey, Northern Virginia as testing grounds. And so then that provoked some competition from the Democratic side, because you had a bunch of people in the Democratic Party that were frustrated because the party was not investing as much in outreach and maybe taking the Asian American vote for granted a little bit. And so that competitive dynamic started increasing mobilization. And then the big shift happened in 2018, 2020, 2022, in which, because of these razor close elections, not only for presidential races, but also in congressional districts, right? You have this fast growing population. And then you have more and more competitive races, partly because Asian Americans, on average, tilt more towards the Democratic Party than to the Republican Party. So all of a sudden now, our votes, even if we're only 3%, 4%, but in Nevada it's much higher than that, all of a sudden we can make a big difference in many of these swing districts. So that's been a major part of the updraft. We've also seen philanthropy and nonprofits doing nonpartisan work too. Right, so Asian Americans continue to have high numbers of people that are entering the electorate who are newly naturalized, and but it doesn't always mean that they're going to vote right away. You need to have the investments, either by the parties and campaigns, or by the nonprofit sector, to help people navigate this process. Especially in these direct democracy states, you have these complicated ballot propositions, so it requires effort. Additional outreach, and finally people are starting to step up. Final thing I'll say is, so Asian Americans and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, both groups saw record high levels of turnout in 2020. But when we conducted our survey in April and May, there was much less enthusiasm. You also saw a pretty significant decline in support for Joe Biden. from 2020 to 2024, but Trump did not reap the gains. So essentially, you had a lot of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders kind of like on the sidelines, similar to other constituencies, but pretty dramatically so. And the entry of Harris into the race has made a huge difference for our communities.
We can end the program now. Make sure you vote. I'm just kidding. Well, this is an open conversation. I want you all to contribute to this statistic or this data that we've collected. But I'll go ahead and jump to Michelle first, and then have Nancy and Jessalyn fill in. But really, because we were talking earlier, and I know that you're part of that. This jump. You're a newly naturalized citizen, and yeah, congratulations. But yeah.
Yeah, I would love to. Yeah, you should say congratulations to me like 3 years ago. So I'll share my story. Okay. I'm really proud that I'm part of this big surge, big jump in the Asian American voter registration. I moved to America in 2017 when I was 37 years old. I used to practice law. I was an attorney in China. So I applied for citizenship basically the day I was eligible. So I became American citizen in 2021, just less than 4 years after I moving to America. And the same year, 4 months later, there is a special election held, the no on recall for Governor Newsom. So I voted in that election. So since then, I voted already like twice. So this election will be my third time. So that the Governor Newsom, that election was a huge deal for me, a huge moment for me, because it's not only my first vote in America, but it's my first political vote in my life. Yeah. So talking about the big surge of Asian American registration in our Chinese community, I would say I want to share there are two big factors contribute to this data. First is under Trump's administration, he started really strong stance on China, and he started a trade war with China. So during that time, like many Chinese green card holders, they don't feel they feel uneasy. They feel like basically uncertain about the relationship, the tension between China and the U.S. And so this kind of political environmental change pushed many Chinese green card holders to become U.S. citizens. And also actually apply for American citizen is not that like an easy decision, because China doesn't allow a dual citizenship. So it's about for Chinese people here, we feel the need to have more like security and stability for our families here. So I have many friends who basically experience this kind of the experience. And second reason is a pandemic. When the anti-Asian hate surge, then the people feel like, hey, it's not good enough just making money, growing your career, raising your family here. You have to come up to speak up. Otherwise, things won't change for better. Yeah, I think these two reasons contribute to how Chinese there are more Chinese voters. Yeah, contribute to this data. Yeah.
So I'm the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party, and so a lot of my political observations come from that lens. So I dovetail on what Michelle said about the Trump administration's attitudes towards Asian Americans, and particularly the Chinese, and then COVID, because of the blame that they placed on the Chinese for COVID, the backlash that it had on people who were of Asian descent, no matter where you came from. And then in San Francisco in particular, there was a lot of activism around anti-AAPI hate. San Francisco is, I think, a unique political microcosm. I'll defer to the political scientist about that. But it really is a place where there is a lot of activism, and because the AAPI-NH community is so large here, that we have a lot of politicians and political activists and grassroots activists who are here, and then people who are activated because of Trump and COVID. And then when you layer on top of that, a couple of really important issues to the AAPI-NH community. One around the school board in San Francisco, which, because in COVID, San Francisco Unified School District was the last major school district to reopen. There was a lot of activism around public schools, and significantly a recall of 3 of the board members, which activated Asian parents in a way that we had never seen in San Francisco before. The other issue is that of public safety. And so in 2019, San Francisco elected not its first, but its second defense attorney as the DA in San Francisco, the first being Terrence Hallinan, the second being Chesa Boudin. And that in itself had its own backlash because of either rightfully or wrongfully perceived notions around the degradation of public safety due to a defense attorney being the district attorney. I mean, he had a lot of policies that that really were divergent from what even a progressive prosecutor would do. And so, again, there was another recall, and these 2 recalls were simultaneous. One was voted on in a special election in February, and the other was voted on in, I believe it was the midterm primary in 2022 in June. And both were successful. And so I think that our Asian population in San Francisco was really, really mobilized between those 2 forces, in addition to the anti-AAPI hate movement, and like these latent feelings about Trump. And really what it has done is activated a population that hadn't necessarily been activated before, but also then continues to be activated into the next election cycle, because now people are realizing, oh, this is why voting is important. This is why it's important to pay attention to what happens electorally, and not just on the national level, but also at the local level as well.
Thank you, Nancy. And we'll get into, statewide, San Francisco or locally, and then, yes, the federal election, and why we're all here today. We're all going to vote. But Justin, I do want to say that an hour ago I was doing some research, and there was a headline in the New York Times that said Filipino Americans may come down to being a deciding factor or voting bloc in Nevada. Nevada matters to us very much so. So I want you to contribute and elaborate on this finding of an uptick of Asian American voters, but particularly, what matters to Filipino American voters.
That's great you mentioned that, because just recently over the weekend, there was a huge Asian American NHPI outreach in Nevada. And when the coalition building in Nevada has been huge. So I'm actually the regional co-chair for the Harris Walls, Filipino Americans for Harris Walls. But we're working with the Southeast Asians for Harris Walls. You have our Koreans, and over 120 organizations, whether they're, the the Democratic clubs have all coalesced together because Nevada is so crucial. And you mentioned Filipino Americans. There are a lot of Filipino Americans in Nevada. And we've been every week actually been doing phone banking from, California volunteers calling over to Nevada, specifically calling Filipino Americans. And really letting them know and state the case why we need to vote for Harris Walz. And so this is really, we're down to the wire. And we're calling everyone to volunteer and support because we know how crucial Nevada is, as you mentioned. And I think the issues that, Filipino Americans in that community really care about is ensuring, number one, it's really around like healthcare. Healthcare is huge. In that community, and also just being able to, I think the activism has really come from a place where now, the first generation of Filipino Americans, they were just working 2 to 3 jobs, just trying to make it survive. And now the next generation has a privilege to be able to have one job or hopefully be able to be more activated. And we've seen that there's a generation that is even more activated, and it's intergenerational too. I think that's the beauty of it. You have both young folks and also the elders coming together and really, pushing towards what we want the outcome to be, this coming November election. And we know that the values are aligning. We just need to connect with, those Filipino American voters or ANHI voters. And when they hear in language, and I think this is something I want to share, it's so important to have resources that are in language. When they're getting a phone call, and they have that language capacity is there, there's a connection right away.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. I shared stuff in Khmer and in Lao and Thai this past weekend, and it was incredible to see people be, oh, I understand what you're trying to say. I need to vote. Yes, you do. By the way, for the record, we did put out requests for, folks who are part of the Republican Party and conservative supporters, but we didn't get enough responses. And then I think a good, and I think for actually here in San Francisco Bay Area, many of them are actually running for office, which is great, right? Like to be civically engaged. So we'll go back to this big conversation around the issues. Let's focus on the issues. Some of you have already brought it up, what matters to us. But I hear the economy come up a lot. That then creates like more of a divided conversation, especially intergenerationally, right? And we're all thinking about this. And so Karthik, you had made a point right before we started about this being more party loyalty. We're just not saying it, but please explain.
Yeah, so it's it's tempting to think that people vote on the issues and judging which candidate is better, just on maybe the merits of the case. But at least in the last 2 decades in America, party polarization is getting stronger and stronger, and with that, party identification is getting stronger and stronger. So even though API Democrats as well as Republicans say the economy, jobs in the economy is the most important issue, who do they think is going to do a better job? Not surprisingly, Democrats think Harris is going to do a better job. Republicans think Trump is going to do a better job. Among independents, Trump is doing better on the economy. But the economy is not the only issue that matters. It's actually kind of challenging to figure out what are the kinds of issues that are going to make a difference in how people vote. Because just because they say an issue is important to them. So by the way, healthcare does rise to the top depending on the survey and the way the question is asked. But we also asked the question in an innovative way in an April survey, and we asked it again in September. And you can think of this as a kind of deal breaker, right, or single issue voter question. And we actually innovated in doing this. There's no other mainstream survey that asked it in this way, and I was excited that we were able to introduce a new kind of question. And we said, basically the question was, I'm going to read a list of issues to you, and let me know if you could ever vote for a candidate that you disagreed with on that issue, or is that issue so important to you that you cannot vote for that candidate because you disagree with them? And we had a list of issues, including the economy, abortion, we had Israel-Gaza, and a few other issues. Going into it, especially with the uncommitted movement, we thought that Israel-Gaza would be at the top of one of these deal breaker issues. It was actually at the bottom. The issue at the top was racism and discrimination. So very much, right? So even if people may be frustrated with the Democratic Party as the incumbent party on economic performance, it cannot get over the racism and the discrimination, right? And so in some ways, the Republican Party is really hurting itself in terms of the kind of rhetoric that is coming out because they just will not attract new voters, with that. Number 2 issue is abortion, right? So part of healthcare is about healthcare costs. Part of healthcare is abortion. Final thing I'll say on that is that, for the first time ever, and I've been doing survey research since 2008, for the first time ever, we have a gender gap in the AAPI vote. And some of it, Trump had made inroads among men between 2016 and 2020. But a lot of it since April, May has been this turbocharging of support among API women. And we had a question in terms of what aspects of Harris's identity appeal to people. And it wasn't the fact that she has Asian heritage, it's the fact that she's a woman. And among women, among younger voters, among Democratic voters. So it's one of these issues that is finally now, I think, gaining recognition, but it's very different from 2016, where gender was front and center. Whereas here, Harris's race has been more front and center until recently. And most people are talking about Trump and male voters, but you're seeing this like real turbocharging among women of color and especially among API women.
I like this statistic very much. It's open to the panel. Please jump in on the topic of issues that we care about. And this could be, yes, San Francisco. There's a lot to talk about in San Francisco, by the way. I want to remind you, we are in the Bay Area. So locally, there are a few issues and there's statewide issues. So we don't have to stay on the federal election, but please jump in on anything that you feel that you're hearing from your community as far as the issues that matter to us.
Well, I think that, San Francisco, for people who are not familiar with our politics, we have a very, very contentious mayor's race that's going on right now. There are 5 major candidates that, the field is kind of whittled down to, but a lot of the conversation has been around, where is the API vote going, to which candidate? And so there has been a lot of courting, both leaders in the API community to see, well, who can, because none of the candidates are Asian Americans, not in that AANHPI. Did I get it right?
You did.
The acronym is really hard for me.
Don't feel bad, Nancy. Some of us are part of the LGBTQ community. We keep adding on, and then so now we're just all one big happy family.
One big happy family.
Yeah.
So there's no candidate among the 5 major mayoral candidates that is of an Asian ancestry, and so. They're looking for surrogates. They're looking for proxies, people who will vouch for them in the community, people who speak in language. So there have been a lot of phone banks in language and mailers in language. And I think that Willie Brown said once that you can win. You can't win an election without the Asian vote. In San Francisco. He said it's much better, but that's the essential part of it. It's like, you can try to build a coalition, but the community is so large at this point. I think it makes up about 35% of registered voters in San Francisco, 21% are Chinese, that you really have to have some part of that in order to win an election.
Yeah, I think on the local level, I'm not, with the city of Daly City, the issues that I'm hearing is around, public safety and also just affordability and being able to remain in the city. Like folks that have grown up, may have gone to high school with me, have said, look, it's just really hard to purchase a home, and especially nowadays. And so that's always been kind of an issue at the forefront, with our city. Our city has about like 100,000 is the population, but our API is at community is at about 62%. So it's a very high population. And at one point we have 5 city council members. At one point we had a super majority, meaning 4 out of 5 was, out of Asian descent, happened to be Filipino American. But that was huge in 2018. Because for a very long time, I'll share with all of you, I was probably young in high school. I looked at the city council and wondered why there was no Asian woman on there, and with such a high population. I didn't know I was going to run in the future, but it was just a thought. You have those thoughts like, oh, I wonder why there isn't a representation. But now, for me, even in this role, when younger women, come and visit City Hall. And, there was this one group that came over and mentioned, oh, the mayor is going to be here. And she was young Filipina, 7-year-old, said, the mayor's a girl? And this is probably 3 years ago. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like she still, has a mind frame that it's not a woman. And so in that moment, even that for that one young lady to now change her mind frame was something for me, like, I know why I'm in this role and why we need to continue to have that representation. And so when we're talking about empowerment and voting, it's all interconnected. We need to have our younger people understand how, it's important to get activated and ensure it. Like, how do we get representation? Well, you have to vote the issues you care about and vote for people in office that, care about the issues that you care about, and also have a lens of lived experience that others may not, right? So
One quick thing I want to jump in on the housing affordability. And this is where, when you break down our community by ethnicity and also like low income populations versus more prosperous populations, it's really important for us to overcome that kind of model minority myth that often exists, right? And so this is where, especially with Pacific Islanders, so, we have this data tool called Community Data Explorer. You can go to explore.apidata.com and check it out. And if you look at the Tongan population, for example, in San Mateo County, if you look at their overall household income, it looks the same as the average population in San Mateo County. But if you look either at income per capita, right? Yeah, if you look at income per capita, it's much lower. And then you look at housing, overcrowded housing. Tongans are much more likely to live in overcrowded housing, right? And so here you have populations that are really struggling to just get by. And certainly even in the city of San Francisco, housing has gotten so expensive. And so often I think it's not just about making sure, first of all, lower income Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are much less likely to vote. And they're probably the ones most affected by policies and whatever the solution is for more affordable housing, right? And so that's really, I would say, important for us as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to think about how do we think about the community's interest that might not always express itself in terms of people going out to vote, because the lower income population, has a lot more barriers. And you're talking about working 2 or 3 jobs, right? Much less likely to have the time to get informed and to make a plan to vote and to vote.
Anything to add, Michelle?
Yeah, I love what you just shared with us. It sounds very encouraging, and the people most care about the number one issue is racism. Second is abortion rights. For me personally, I care about abortion rights, basically on my highest kind of priority. But in our Chinese immigrant community, I would say I totally echo Nancy. Chinese immigrant community really care about education. So I've noticed more and more Chinese families are more involved in the local school boards election. And on the statewide level, many Chinese immigrants, they care about affirmative action. It's also related to education, care about public safety. This kind of, high up on their priority list. But I want to share about the policy will make a huge impact on our Chinese American community on the federal level, on the federal policy. So I just mentioned under Trump administration, there's a trade war, all this. Actually, he also started really like strong stand on China and started the China Initiative. So the China Initiative says it meant to protect the country's security, like purpose. Yeah, intellectual IP, all this. But it ended up doing more harms to Chinese Americans than it intended the purpose. And also, I think most of you you heard about the Project 2025.
Oh, right, that, yes.
Yes. So it totally outlines the extreme conservative policies. But I don't know if it mentioned China more than 880 times. And Russia, Iran, North Korea combined less than 200 times. So basically, we think this is a huge like warning sign for Chinese American community and our Asian American community. So we should really pay attention to this and speak up and get more involved in this election.
Yeah, the continued xenophobic and racism, from the previous administration. Trying not to go back. I'm trying to be optimistic. But to Karthik's point, and now's about the time that we're going to open up actually to the floor and our awesome, amazing in-person audience with questions. We have a mic going on, and you're lucky number one, and then we'll swing back this way.
Well, should I stand up? Well, first of all, we live in Oakland. Lots of AAPI, and my Filipino wife and I were unsure whether we wanted to come in tonight. We're so glad we did. It's been a great panel, and I've heard a lot of impressive things tonight. The most impressive thing I've heard was Nancy rode a bus back from Reno. She did not fly, knocking on doors. That's incredible. I wanted to just kind of echo, and I hope this does not sound demeaning, but Michelle Tu's comment on China is what scares me the most about what's going on right now. China, I've spent a little time there, is a great place. They're doing a lot of things right. We travel a lot. You can go around South America, and they're building ports. We are dropping bombs on Gaza. The Chinese are doing a lot for the whole world. And why the United States is making them into a bogeyman drives me crazy. So anyway, I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on more, to expand on what Michelle has said, more on China.
Yeah, one thing I'll just say, I actually think this is a very tricky issue because of the perpetual foreigner stereotype. that Asian Americans experienced. So in World War II, it wasn't Germans that were rounded up. It was Japanese Americans that were rounded up. Part of the reason why, first of all, for most people, foreign policy is not important, including among Chinese Americans. Chinese Americans think of China as a rival. So it's not that Chinese Americans here are somehow advancing China's interests. So I want to be very clear about that. And so the loyalty, and that's the problem, the loyalties of Asian Americans are being questioned as part of this larger chess game that is being played. But if you look at the kinds of issues that matter to Asian Americans, it's domestic issues. Foreign policy is very low. There's different ways we ask this question. But it is Asian Americans, whatever the issue is of the day. After 9/11, it was people who look like me that were being targeted. During COVID, it was people who look like you that were being targeted, right? And so it's just, I think it's a really challenging thing to figure out. How can we remove this perpetual foreigner kind of suspicion in American culture? And by the way, it might be mostly Republicans do it, but there are Democrats that do it too. And so that's why I think it's just important to build political power, but also to hold your party accountable, even if you're a Democrat, right? In terms of the kind of language that is being used to make sure that if it is a rivalry with the government of China, that's one thing, and it's not with the Chinese people, and certainly not Chinese Americans.
Thank you, Karthik. Yeah, thank you for your comments. So, yeah, the China initiative, actually just this month, I think 1 or 2 weeks ago, a group of House Republicans launched the China Week in the Congress and passed 28 tough on China bills. And also they try to relaunch the China initiative. Actually, during the China initiative period, there are so many Chinese professors, scholars, and scientists got wrongfully prosecuted, and still some people professors still can find a job, and pay tons of millions of attorney fees, ruin their life, and make all our scholars, scientists in our academia world so paranoid. And we are the country is really welcome immigrants, and we are so great, the strongest so-called country in the world is because our diversity and our immigrant policy. So I really appreciate you brought up the Japanese American concentration camp. This is totally, we don't really take action, pay attention to this issue, the history would repeat. It's totally possible. So I'm really.
By the way, some of that history with these alien land laws, right? I mean, California had passed one of the earliest alien land laws, preventing people who were not naturalized citizens from owning land, specifically to disenfranchise Chinese, Japanese, and Indians, right?
Yes,
like they were the big
history.
different
Even
landowners, property owners.
California.
And you're seeing this happening in different states now.
Oh yes, in Texas and
Florida.
in Florida. Yeah, already. Yeah, it's happening.
Well, what a history. See if we'll get not angry, but affected. We're all going to vote, and it's going to do something this election. I want to make sure that we got a few folks who want to ask questions. So go ahead.
My name is John Wong, a longtime member of the Commonwealth Club, but really a longtime resident of the city. So I first want to make a comment on the most recent discussion. I have actually a question after that that's kind of unrelated. Regarding what happened to the Japanese at the beginning of World War II is happening again, the alien land laws, and really the plethora of states that are passing laws to restrict individuals in certain countries from purchasing properties is going really epidemic. I mean, there's 28 states that are looking at the laws. The most heinous one is in Florida, and I'm part of an association called ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America, and we filed a lawsuit against the state of Florida. And going through that process is interesting because you get a sense of the dynamics of how the general population feels. And so, I think the take action and stuff is there, but it is happening. And we're working on maybe getting some federal legislation to address the real issue of potential national security, but not have it have the sledgehammer effects as when the country of Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Yes, that was a declaration of war. It was national security, but the response to put everybody of Japanese descent away, I think is starting to become acceptable in this country again. So that's a comment, and I think there are organizations that are taking action. Now the more granular piece. So Nancy, you mentioned Willie Brown and others before him have said in San Francisco you have to have the Chinese vote. But when I was growing, and what that meant, you go to the 6 companies, you go to a banquet, and you catch the 6 companies' officials, and then you get all the Chinese vote, those of us who voted in there. But that has changed. And I think right now is no longer that one power structure, I'll just get to them and I got it all. And so it is disaggregated in many ways, as you're saying. And I remember when a gentleman named Gordon Lau ran for Board of Supervisors, all of us galvanized a Chinese person. Oh, yes, yes, yes. But right now, in the elections, you have a number of different folks of Asian background, and now we're actually looking at their policies. And depending on our stance, which is a healthy thing, I think, rather than just on race. But I see in other parts of the country, there are certain groups that are emerging into elected office, and groups that you wouldn't think be natural. In Minnesota, the Hmong community, which came over as pure refugees, put into areas that you wouldn't imagine freezing cold from somebody in a tropical country. But from those communities, in fact, are local elected officials and now federal elected officials. And I'm curious as to your research, how did that happen? Was it just because it was unusual and therefore this galvanized of a single voting bloc? Or is it that they're appealing to a broad spectrum? And maybe if you get into federal campaigns, you can't be just Asian, Asian, Asian. You have to have a broader picture. I'm curious as to what your data is showing on that.
Well, it's a complicated picture, and then just in the interest of time, I'll say very quickly. So unlike Black members of Congress and Latino members of Congress, most Asian members of Congress represent districts that are not majority Asian, right? Most Black members of Congress come from Black majority districts. Most Latino members of Congress come from Latino majority districts. So people have always had to do that kind of cross-racial appeal to get to Congress. That said, for local offices, often it is geographic concentration that makes a difference, right? Part of the story about Vietnamese Americans in Orange County, by the way, most of the local electeds historically and even still more Republican than Democrat, because the Republican Party was strong there, and part of the way to win office and actually wield influence was through the Republican parties, right? So there often is a local story, right, in terms of local elected officials kind of building their name for themselves and then getting up there. But now it is a very exciting time to see so many different communities like stepping up, and part of it is because of the threats that they see, but it's also, when you talked about the second generation, so you have a lot of people, either 1.5 generation, foreign born, but they came early enough that they see the discrimination that their communities are facing, but they're equipped to do something about it. And you're seeing more and more of that starting to happen.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank our amazing moderator bringing up this amazing panel. We heard perspectives from a mayor, a professor, a community builder, a prosecutor. Well, as you all know, probably can tell I'm a friend of Michelle. I know her a little bit. So Michelle, I have a question for you. As an open lesbian and a recent immigrant building a Chinese community in...
Back to the LGBTQ
Yes, always.
topic.
Yes.
So you're building a Chinese community in Silicon Valley where it makes up 40% of Asian in demographics, right? And people from different background holding different political views. How do you manage? What have you done to bring these people together and build this community.
Thank you. So you said 40%. 40% of Asian population, population in our Santa Clara County. So I want to, just before I answer your question. So for this election, our Santa Clara County more than 40% of Asian population, but we only had one Asian supervisor on our board. But for this election, we are set to basically potentially elect 2 more Asian board of supervisors in our Santa Clara County. So which is really, really encouraging. So so we are talking about Kamala Harris, and from our Asian American representation from our local level to national level, where it's growing. Yeah.
About Evan Lowe.
Yes, Evan Lowe. Yeah, we're working. Hildy is Evan Lowe's big, the campaign booster. So if Evan Lowe, this is why we support Evan to personally. We support Evan to run to win for the Congress, because it's so important for more Asian, especially Chinese American, to be in our capital, to make to participate in these important decisions to avoid the Japanese concentration camp tragedy. Yeah, so. We are building a Chinese immigrant community in Silicon Valley. So I'm the only, I think maybe only one speaker, from South Bay. Chinese immigrant community is really complex. It's has a lot of complexity in it. People from mainland, from Taiwan, from Hong Kong, from in different times, different political views on both America politics and the mainland Chinese governments. We knew it. So when we first started, we set our mission very, very clear. We only focus on our Bay Area life, our local communities. And also we make our value very clear. We promote diversity, inclusion, and democratic values. So when you say your value very clear, it's easier to attract like-minded people. And how we reach to more people within our Chinese immigrant community. There is a huge Chinese immigrant community in South Bay, in Silicon Valley, especially in the tech community. So our approach is to reach the move the middle, pay attention, focus on working on the move the middle and meet people who where they are. We not only host civic engagement stuff. We know that we do like arts culture workshops and many like even wellness gatherings or food.
I was going to say food, right?
Yes.
Food.
Yes, very important to use food, games, mahjong, this culture to bring people together. So people, after 5 years growing in South Bay, and people realize, this group of people are really like open-minded, friendly, and really resourceful. We want to hang out with them. Okay, hang out with us. You have to be cool. Okay. This is how we bring people together. So I want to share a story.
Okay. We got time for share the story. For 20 seconds, I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and then we have our last questions for the panel. But hold your question. So Michelle will share the story, and then we'll go to question.
I share a story. So this year, during the Pride Month, there's a Chinese community leader reach out to us. Hey, let's do a LGBTQ celebration together. I was like, it's so cool. And she's big time influencer, but she's a straight woman goes to a pretty conservative church every Sunday with her husband. And that kind of conservative church, the minister would say on the stage, like being gay is sin. Like we ended up, and he boasted, she promoted our events to like thousands of her followers, and we ended up have very like wonderful celebration. So we have so many stories. We have so many of these kind of stories happening in our community. So I would say, I think we just, my point is, just you give and people will always surprise you if you give them a chance.
Good point. Good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Question. Hello, everyone. My name is Christopher Sun, and I wanted to go back to the topic of the survey. I believe history has always shown that people band together easier through the motivation of fear and hatred. And this has happened time and time again, as discussed earlier with the Japanese after 9/11. And everyone categorizes Asians as just one large group, but we are so many subdivisions that each one has its own things that we care about and different values. And the only thing that truly connects us all together for this moment is the fear of racism and discrimination, as pointed out from your survey. And most people don't have the tools or resources to know how to combat it. And I believe the first step to doing that is creating, education for them to have in their own respective languages and from their own respective people. And my organizations have been working on that as well. And yeah, I just wanted to tell everyone here that I think voting education and education on what things like Project 2025 will bring is more important than is the best way to have everyone come together.
Karthik?
Yeah, one quick thing I'll say, I mean, it's important to have that sense of history, right? By the way, even if you look at my colleague Jennifer Lee and I, she's a professor at Columbia, we wrote this paper, who counts as Asian, right? And if you look at everyone here on the stage is Asian, we all look very different from each other. So how did we figure out that this is one race, right? So if we go back, there are Supreme Court decisions that essentially say, because we are not white, we cannot naturalize. Like that's the basis, right? It's the exclusion from political voice. So it's been going on for centuries, right? And so that it's that feeling of exclusion that hopefully then we can band together and change America. But part of what's happening now, next year will be the 60th anniversary of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act, right? So there are people who want to turn the clock back so that most of us in this room wouldn't be here in the future. So that is huge, right? And this happened before, right? In the first Trump administration, you had Tom Cotton, who dramatically wanted to cut back on family visas and even employment-based visas. So this is an active, not just a debate, but I would say a fight for the future of this country. And so part of my hope would be, of course, we want as many, turnout even at record levels is still below 60%. I hate to say it, folks. Okay? So we need to get that up dramatically, but we need to make sure that people stay engaged and involved no matter what happens on election day. And that's often a barrier with Asian Americans, but that barrier is because these institutions are not built to want to welcome our opinion. So, as Harris said, sometimes you got to kick that door down. So we need to continue pushing post-election.
By the way, going back and wanting to relive history is so Buddhist. It's like we believe in the reincarnation of. Anyway, another program, another show. We're going to end with just very quick questions, just for you to answer very quickly. So, 2 quick questions. One is your biggest fear as far as the outcome of this election. I'll give you an example of how to answer. My biggest fear is the threat of our democracy. Jocelyn.
my biggest fear is that we go back to 2016. That is my biggest fear. But I have so much hope, and really quickly, I have so much hope because when you share that data point, that even those that are undecided really put discrimination and equity at the forefront, it shows that our hopefully like nation is now looking at more equitable ways, a lens that is moving far from what we talked about in the past. And so that's where I'm at. I'm hopeful that really I see this next generation not ever wanting to go back.
My fear is more and more we're moving away from an evidence-based reality to one that is entirely politically driven. When people are attacking FEMA administrators that are trying to help people after natural disasters, like that is a flashing red warning sign.
Can I have two biggest fears? No, one
Make
is,
it quick.
echo the threat of our democracy. The second is Project 2025.
My biggest fear is waking up on November 6th and thinking that there was more that we could do. And so that's my job, to make sure that
So no sleep until November 6th.
no sleep. And I also have 2 small kids, so there's definitely no sleep in my house. But my job is to make sure that every one of you who wants to be involved or has listened to this program and doesn't know how to get involved has a way to do that. And so my email is nancy@sfdems.org. We will find a way for you to plug in wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever your comfort level is with engaging other voters. There's a job for everyone. And we can't wake up on November 6th and think, I should have done more. So
I love that. We're going to have some time for social networking and give away our contact information too. So last question, very, very fast, less than 5 seconds. And we're going to end on hope. So I'll start first. My hope is that history is made. Jocelyn.
My hope is that we have Kamala as president. I'm going to say it.
You say it. Yes, yes.
Yeah, my hope is that we commit to building a much stronger future than we have in the past.
My hope is with our work, our community work, we can increase the Chinese immigrant voting rate by 20% in Silicon Valley area. I'll refer it back to you to
That is
check
very
out
ambitious.
our work.
my hope is that joy, decency, democracy, and Kamala Harris win on November 5th.
Mic drop. And yes, the program is officially ended. I want to thank you all for joining us here at the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. Thank you to all of you who joined us online. Let's give another big, huge round of applause for all of our speakers. Mayor Jocelyn Manalo, Karthik Ramakrishnan, and also Michelle Zhang of Society's Heart Delight, and also, of course, last but not least, Nancy Tung, who leads our San Francisco Democratic Party. I'm Michelle Meow of The Michelle Meow Show. We have more programs coming up for you. You can head to commonwealthclub.org/MMS for some incredible programs that are coming up, such as former fire chief of San Francisco, Janine Nicholson, who retired this year, somewhat surprisingly, but you'll hear her story if you come on through in November. I want to wish you all the best. I'll see you on the other side. Hopefully it's the bright side after the election. We'll see you next time.